You finished the thing, whatever it was, a project, a goal, a milestone, reached a standard you've been working towards, and you waited for the feeling that was supposed to arrive, and it didn't. Or maybe it arrived and was there for a few hours and just dissolved, or it arrived and felt smaller than the effort that you thought it deserved. This episode is for people who've had that experience, not as a crisis, as a quiet, persistent pattern. The gap between what you accomplished and what you feel. I want to say something before I jump into the episode. The world enormously benefits from people accomplishing things. Things get built because of you. Problems get solved. People trust you with the really challenging things because you can deliver them. None of what follows is asking you to become less capable. What it's pointing towards is a layer where the capability gets to serve something it currently can't reach. The achievement arrived and the relief didn't. And that gap is not a character flaw. It's a clinical signal. And a signal is different from a symptom. A symptom tells you something hurts. A signal tells you where to look. Today on the Ask Dr. Gil podcast, I want to talk about this gap and what you might be able to do about it. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Ask Dr. Gil. I am your host, Dr. Gil Winkleman. And today on the podcast, we're going to talk about mastery without the reward, that gap that exists for many people. And before we go into the structure, let me place this archetypally as it relates to the quiz, because I don't think I've talked about the archetype, the adept. And that's someone who has organized their inner life around what they've mastered. And the reason this is pertinent in my work is they do that in terms of their health, not necessarily professionally, but something that they're very good at. The adept solves problems the way they solve everything else, by getting better at something, by feeling better, by becoming better. They refine, they optimize, they figure things out. And that orientation is the source of most of what the adept has built. And they apply it to everything in their lives. Is also eventually what they run into. In other words, it becomes their ceiling. The pattern I'm describing today isn't just about professional achievement, by the way. And I want to make that clear. It's about anyone who organizes their internal life around becoming exceptional around something, whatever that something is. And it can be productivity for sure, but it can also be caregiving. The parent that's mastered the logistics of family life until the mastery itself becomes exhausting, for example. Or it could be around spiritual practice. The person who's read everything, attended the workshops, they've refined their inner work, and still something isn't touched underneath. They are still trapped in that prison of their thoughts. The emotional intelligence, fixing people, learning something itself. It can be health optimization, where they're trying to optimize their lab results or feeling a particular way. And the pattern underneath all of these is the same. Mastery is the route to feeling okay. The thing you've become exceptionally good at has been doing several jobs at once. And for many people, those jobs overlap rather than happen in sequence. But let's name them separately so that we can make them visible. So the first job is regulation. One of the things that I've seen with this pattern is that Mastery works. It is important to establish that before anything. Completing something, optimizing something, being the capable one can produce a genuine physiological or psychological shift. Activation comes down, the restlessness stills, the internal noise quiets. This is the nervous system that has learned early that competence is how we obtain relief. That learning is accurate. It's an intelligent response to the environment that generated off. And the nervous system is extraordinarily good at turning successful adaptations into an identity. That is one of its greatest strengths, but it also is where we can become trapped. It creates a prison, if you will. And healthy mastery can expand your life. This episode is about looking at the moments where mastery becomes responsible for holding your life together instead, and maybe keeping you in a smaller box than you might otherwise be in. The second job is identity. And this goes back to the box, right? When the regulatory function repeats long enough, it becomes structural. And the achievement stopped being a tool, but became an identity. It's part of who you think you are. And if you don't have that structure, you don't know who you are. The adept doesn't just use the mastery to feel better, they find out who they are from it. Competence becomes the answer to the question of value. And without a project to point to, without something being built or optimized or delivered, there's an instability that is felt. The self loses its anchor. And a specific behavioral mirror is going on vacation and feeling really uncomfortable. It's not the inability to enjoy the rest, but the unease of existing without something that you're working towards. That slight anxiety that arrives on the third or fourth day when there's nothing accomplished, it's not laziness. It is the identity without having an anchor. Now, the third job, and I've pointed to this a little bit, is protection. And I think this is one that is most important and least acknowledged. The forward momentum, the next project, the next optimization, the next refinement, it keeps the attention oriented on the external. And underneath that is everything the forward motion has been doing to prevent something from surfacing. Mastery isn't the problem. It's when mastery becomes the route to feeling okay and the only route and it functions as a way of avoiding things. What began as a strength has become the only door the nervous system knows how to walk through. And the thing you're being protected against doesn't go away. It's still there. In fact, you're still in the confines of the prison. Nobody tells you you're running from something when you're building something. That's what makes this particular ceiling so hard to see from inside it. And we live in a society that values the building. For the adept specifically, the one door the nervous system reaches for is cognitive. They go for more analysis and more understanding of the pattern, more refinement of the framework. Analysis is invaluable. The insight becomes another way of staying one step away from contact. It is what gives the distance, if you will, and it creates a loop so that you stay in place. Now, this is the main thing about the adept. Its achievement stopped being a tool and became a structure. And that is the ceiling of the adept in one sentence. So that's what the mastery has been doing. It's been doing these three jobs simultaneously. The ceiling appears when those jobs stop working as well as they used to. And when the regulation doesn't fully regulate anymore, when the identity needs more input to feel stable, when the protection begins to cost more than it's protecting against. The gap is the experience of the ceiling in real time. It's not a crisis, but a quiet, persistent disconnect between effort and result, and between what you accomplish and what you feel. And it takes three forms. The one thing I will say before we go on is sometimes this comes to light when there is a crisis. And I've had clients who have worked in really amazing careers and got laid off. And that was terrifying for them because they didn't know what to do with themselves. And, putting aside the survival aspects of, needing to make money, in some cases, I had patients. In fact, I remember a particular client who came to me after, it wasn't so much that he was laid off, he had retired and he had plenty of money. That wasn't the issue, but he didn't know what to do with himself. And this is an issue that I think is way more common than people realize. It's why people put off retiring. It's why people sometimes have heart attacks within a few years of retiring. It's that we are trying to control something in our lives through our mastery. I'm going to take a quick break. And on the other end, I'm going to talk about the forms that the gaps can take. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Ask Dr. Gil. I am your host, Dr. Gil Winkleman, and we're talking about the Adept archetype and the mastery that is used as a form of self-protection. And I want to talk about the gaps that show up depending on where someone is standing. There are three forms worth naming because they're often easy to miss or to explain away. The first is that the arrival to the end of the whatever it is doesn't land. So you complete the project and you see that you've done a good job. The milestone is reached, and the feeling that was supposed to come, relief, satisfaction, feeling like you've arrived, either doesn't appear or it appears briefly and dissolves faster than expected. The adept moves immediately to the next thing, not entirely by choice, but because the stillness that follows completion is uncomfortable in a way that's hard to account for. Something needs to be in progress. The achievement was real, but the satisfaction had an expiration date, sometimes less than 48 hours. The second form is the escalation threshold. What used to be enough no longer is. The goal that would have felt significant 5 years ago, barely registered now. The standard keeps moving, and it's not because of ambition exactly, but because the regulatory function requires more input to produce the same result. The dose required to feel okay keeps increasing. That is a physiological observation, not a moral one. It's not about greed. It's about a tolerant nervous system. This form is particularly visible in health optimization, in spiritual practice, and in caregiving. Domains where the escalation is harder to name because it doesn't look like a conventional ambition. the parent who's never quite satisfied with how they're showing up for their kids, or the meditator whose practice keeps requiring more depth to produce the same sense of groundedness, or the relationship that keeps needing better communication or insight or repair because the relationship work itself has become a regulatory strategy. The third form is performance fatigue, and being the capable one, the reliable one, the one who figures things out. This has a cost that compounds over time. And it's not the effort itself, but the continuous effort of being the person who does the work. It's maintaining that identity and managing the impression that arises that is stressful. Like it takes a lot of energy to be perform being the competent one. The fatigue isn't from the work, it's from the performance. Those are different things. Doing the work, that is a manageable process. But this being the performative one, there's no recovery protocol for that. And you realize that at some point you haven't been able to be the person who's not been the competent one. Now, I want to make a note about all three of these. These are not diagnoses, they're orientations. And it's not that there's something wrong necessarily. It's you want to recognize this because it's a beginning, not a conclusion. The other thing I want to say is that if you're a long-term meditator, oftentimes this experience shows up because you have less attachment to the outcome. And if that's the case, you'll recognize that. That is a different experience. But that's not what I'm talking about here. This is that you've gone for something, you're expecting that high, and you don't get it. So I want to make that distinction because sometimes when you get into deeper states of meditation practice over long periods of time, you start to lose your attachment to things. And it also is the positive things, not just the negative things. What's underneath the ceiling? When the ceiling appears, when the mastery stops producing the relief it once did, the question worth asking is, what has the forward momentum been protecting you from? And in my clinical experience, there's one or more of three things that I see when the adept slows down long enough. The first is there's a grief of an unlived life, the version of themselves that was set aside to become the capable one. Not necessarily a dramatic sacrifice, often the slow accumulation of choices that optimize for competence at the expense of contact, or the creative pursuit that got deprioritized, the relationship that didn't get enough attention, the part of themselves that was too uncertain or too vulnerable or too impractical to survive the optimization process. Often the adept knows exactly what they've given up. They just haven't let themselves feel what that cost. And I'll just say this about this, you know, there are people who at the end of their lives talk about wishing that they had not worked so much, as an example, or not worried so much. And it's an interesting experience to have that. And a lot of people talk about wishing that they had done the more spontaneous things and just gone for it. The second thing is the relational wound underneath the performance. For many of the adepts I've worked with, the competence developed in response to an environment where value was conditional, where belonging or approval was linked to performance. This often happens that the child growing up in this situation finds that capability is the safest way to be in a relationship. But beneath the achievement, there's a longing for a deeper connection and a longing to be seen rather than evaluated, to be received. To exist in relationship without competence being the price of admission And that longing doesn't go away when the achievements accumulate. It actually often deepens. And then the last piece I see is the existential question being postponed. What is this all for? It's not a crisis necessarily. It's a genuine wondering. You reach a goal, and sometimes you're like, well, why? Now what? And the question of ends has never been asked. It's always been kept in the future. And the next thing keeps arriving, and the question keeps being deferred. The question isn't whether you're good at what you do, because you are. The question is whether you're doing what you're actually here for. So, what lies beyond this ceiling? And I want to address the fear directly because every adept I've worked with has it. The fear is that if mastery stops organizing your life, you will become less effective or everything will fall apart. And if the drive disappears, if the competence erodes, you don't necessarily not only don't know who you are, you're afraid all of the things that you built will disappear. That moving to the layer underneath means abandoning what you've built. And in my clinical experience, the opposite tends to happen. When the regulatory function of mastery is no longer the primary job it's doing, the mastery itself can become more precise, more selective, and more satisfying. You stop doing the things that you only did in the service of regulation. You start focusing on what actually matters to you. And it's not that you're less disciplined, it's that you're not using that discipline as a form of protection. Here's what this can look like in ordinary life. Mastery becomes a choice. It's not that you stop being capable, it's that your relation to it changes. You finish work because you're done, not because stopping feels dangerous. You take on a project because you feel called to do it, not to alleviate your anxiety. Now, oftentimes this sounds small, but it changes the quality of how you work, how you rest, and how you organize your relationships. Relationships become more meaningful. You notice you don't need to be the most competent person in every conversation. In fact, it gives you space to be and to be more present. And you stop rehearsing what you're going to say because you kind of realize I don't need to do that. And the other side effect to this is that you can be more in the present. When you stop having to prove yourself all the time, that gives space to just be. And that gives you space to do something creative. That creative pursuit gets 20 minutes that you might not have done it otherwise. Or maybe you actually sit and you're very attentive and present with your loved ones. This is not a call for a new life. It's about accessing the parts of it in the current one and being more engaged with it. You see, the ceiling isn't the end of the adept's path. It is the place where the path changes direction. What's on the other side isn't less, it's different. And for many adepts, it turns out to be what they were building toward all along, but didn't understand that's where their destination was. I want to ask three questions. And the first is when achievement arrives, how long do you feel relief? And has that duration gotten shorter over time? The second is what is the next project protecting you from experiencing, from feeling? What is there underneath that you're avoiding? And the third is if the work moved to the next layer, if the grief, the longing, or the question of the attention the next project has been getting, what do you think actually becomes possible on that other end? The adept ceiling isn't a punishment for being good at what you do. It's an invitation to go beyond. The capability that built everything you've done is the same capability that can take you to where the real life, where the real work lives. You've already proven you can build. The question is not, can you do it? It's whether the building that you're doing can include all of you. Now, next week, I'm going to talk more about healing patterns that aren't entirely yours because the pattern didn't necessarily start with you. And if you haven't taken the healing archetype quiz, it's in the show notes. It's on the Ask Dr. Gill website. You can find it on my homepage, askdrgil.com. And I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to the show. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.